Welcome everyone, Costin here with my campaign guide for Alarielle the Radiant of the High Elves, the Everqueen of Ulthuan. Alarielle doesn't have the fastest or the best early game of the High Elves, or in general in the game when we're thinking about other legendary lords, but she does have a ridiculous amount of late game potential. So if you're playing a campaign as Alarielle, sure, you can do pretty well in the early game if you know what you're doing, but the main benefits of her campaign are the late game benefits, or the mid game to late game benefits that she gets. So let's look over her faction effects, her lord effects, and her situation, and how you should play her. So she has one of her main mechanics is the Defender of Ulthuan. Basically the way this works is that if any territory in Ulthuan is controlled by a non-High Elven faction, you get downsides, but if all of Ulthuan is controlled by the High Elves, she gets major benefits. You do start with -3 control, 18% cost, construction cost increase, and -12% income from buildings. But once you deal with the situation, it becomes absolutely ridiculous as a faction benefit. Control, construction cost, income from buildings gets pretty strong pretty quickly once you get control over all of Ulthuan. You just basically need to build trust with people. That's one of the main faction effects that Alarielle has. Another effect that she has is that she gets a -25% influence cost for intrigue at court. So intrigue can help you with diplomatic relations, can start wars between certain factions, or can help you establish alliances between certain factions, or alliances between other factions on the campaign map. She also gets +2 hero capacity for handmaidens, gets the invocation of Lilith, and also gets the greater invocation of Isha. I'll talk about handmaidens in just a second, but the greater invocation of Isha is just basically giving you regeneration for dryads, treekin, and treemen. Invocation of Lilith gives you a pretty significant magic item drop chance, a cooldown of -30% to spells, and the channeling spire ability. She is a caster lord, she doesn't have the melee skill tree. She isn't necessarily the best caster lord, she's more of a support caster, at least early on. Though later on, once she gets things like Arcane Art Forging and Banishment, she can do quite a bit of damage, but most of her spells are support spells, like Fast Protection, Life Bloom, Shield of Force, Shield of Sapphire, all that kind of stuff. She does have Earthblood as her base ability for HP regeneration in battle. She also gets the Radiant, which means that she's leaving lingering bonuses in regions she visits. She also gets +15 missile strength for Sisters of Avalorn and Handmaiden units, but she does weaken if chaos grows stronger. Basically, if the territory you have has chaos corruption, she's going to start suffering penalties herself. That's how it plays out with Alarielle, though given the way corruption works at the moment in the game, this isn't really any issue, because it's very easy to deal with corruption, and you can see the situation over here when it comes to pros and when it comes to cons over here. Though you do get a significant benefit to dryads, treekin, and treemen units in her army, and you also get dwellers below if you have a very high level of Chaos Undivided Corruption. Reality is you're not really going to get to that particular situation. Unfortunately, because there would be some sweet benefits for physical resistance and weapon strength when it comes to Dryads, Treekin, and Treemen units. Now, in terms of her special skill line, she gets a choice between Tradition Dictates and Blood and Fire. Now, Blood and Fire gives you an upkeep benefit, campaign movement range, leadership, melee defense, casualty replenishment, ward save, all that is useful, but Tradition Dictates is substantially better for an empire building situation, especially. It's 5% income from all buildings. That is ridiculously strong. And +2 control in all provinces. Again, pretty strong, especially the High Elves, who benefit from a very high level of control in their settlements, because their main economic buildings will generate more income if you can maintain 100 control in a province. She gets Leader of the Court, which gives you a diplomatic relations benefit to the High Elves, which isn't really too substantial. You'll have plenty of diplomatic relations benefits with the High Elves, but you do get that -10% construction cost for all buildings. So, of course, the diplomatic relations help you with confederations and military alliances and getting those earlier. She gets Servant of Isha, which gives her an additional hero capacity for handmaidens, unlocks hero recruitment for handmaidens for all provinces, and also +1 hero recruit rank for handmaidens in all provinces. So she can get 4 handmaidens with this skill and her faction fix. You start with 1 capacity, you get an additional 1 for this skill. For this particular skill, you get 2 more through the faction-wide benefits. You're looking at 4 handmaidens pretty early on in your campaign. And that is actually a very substantial campaign benefit, because handmaidens are just amazing heroes. Then she gets a recruitment duration of -1 for Sisters of Avalon, and 10 melee defense for Sisters of Avalon, and a further corruption benefit, and she also has the ward save for herself. Her items are pretty decent, especially the replenishment one and the Star of Avalon. Shieldstone of Isha also giving you some benefits, and she also starts with the Stave of Avalon, which reduces her miscatch chance by -100% when you're using this. Oh, also you can use it to help a fellow mage in your army. I think Alarielle really would want a mage in her army, probably high magic, because her magical effects are just kind of limited. Really good support spells, but if you're looking to just annihilate an entire army with magic, don't look at Alarielle being able to provide that. Now, let's talk about handmaidens. Actually, let's talk about structures, because she does have another faction effect. It is pretty ridiculous. She can build a handmaidens gallery. Now, the handmaidens gallery will give you +1 hero capacity for handmaidens, and unlocks hero recruitment for them, as well as Sisters of Avalon at tier 3. Normally speaking, you have to build this entire building chain in order to get handmaidens as Sisters of Avalon. You don't have to worry about this building chain if you're playing Alarielle. You can just build a handmaidens gallery, and because it's tier 3, you can build it in minor settlements as well. That means Alarielle can get a ridiculous amount of handmaidens, and also plenty of recruitment opportunities for Sisters of Avalon, which are one of the best range units in the entire game. But the handmaidens are ridiculous. The reason they're so ridiculous, beyond the fact that they give you replenishment and growth, which is always really nice to have, especially if you're doing empire building, they're pretty decent in combat, though don't expect them to stand up to something like a noble or dedicated heroes or lords, but decent enough in combat. They're a hybrid hero, though you shouldn't bother with their range skill. Range skills right now just don't work very well. And besides, their range skill does require you to sacrifice their really great skill line over here at the top. They do get the favor of Isha, which gives you 1 control in all provinces faction-wide. That's just a ridiculous amount of control you'll be getting if you're getting handmaidens, because High Elves benefit from high control. Alarielle has the ability of increasing control faction-wide very, very easily. Like, you're looking, if you get 4 handmaidens, you're looking at +4 control faction-wide. And this is on top of the power of nature that Alarielle has as a lord when she's visiting provinces. You can only really use this if you're playing as Alarielle, but basically what it does is when you're taking over a settlement, for the next 10 turns, you're going to get +1 influence, +3 control, 10 growth, or next 9 turns, control, growth, winds of magic benefit, and corruption benefit. She gets a huge amount of influence in her campaign because of this benefit and because of the handmaidens. So she has a great deal of control, a great deal of influence, and growth. And then handmaidens have a ridiculous skill line. In fact, I would say for a hero, it's probably one of the best in the game in terms of faction effects. So they get 2 diplomatic relations with High Elves. Of course, this locks off some of the melee skills over here, or range skills over here, but it's well worth it. 2 diplomatic relations with High Elves, 2 diplomatic relations with all factions per each handmaiden, 5% income from trade tariffs, and 1 influence per turn. Basically, a handmaiden gives you the same kind of economic benefit in terms of trade tariffs as the Elven Embassy. Of course, the Elven Embassy in a province of ports, let's see, 2 ports, 3 ports, will obviously give you a significant economic benefit on top of that, and it generates 1 more influence. But this is on a hero, not on a structure, and on a hero whose capacity you can increase by quite a substantial amount. In fact, I would dare argue that you're going to get bigger benefits in your campaign by building a lot of handmaidens galleries as opposed to building elven embassies. Beyond having a hero that helps you out in combat, you get that diplomatic relations benefit, and that is very substantial because by building better diplomatic relations with all factions, then it's easier to trade with all factions. So once you get a vast and powerful empire as Alarielle, you'll get a lot of trade agreements, and it's much easier to get trade agreements because of all the diplomatic benefits she gets in her faction. So Alarielle really is the empire builder of the High Elves, the strongest legendary lord from that aspect, the strongest legendary lord when it comes to a very long campaign. is quite absurd when you add up her diplomatic relations benefit, her trade tariff benefit, her defender of Wolf One benefit once you control all of Wolf One, her intrigue at court, her power of nature. It just gets pretty damn ridiculous. All added together, it's pretty absurd, actually, in a lot of ways. But, of course, the downside is if any territory of Wolf One is taken over by the enemy, you're going to suffer downsides. In particular, the inner part of Wolf One. Like, if any gate is controlled by an enemy of the High Elves, then you're going to suffer significant downsides. But if you control the inner part of Wolf One, the downsides are significantly less important. And if you control all of Wolf One, you will have major benefits. So that means you need to deal with all of Wolf One. This is, by the way, the kind of campaign where you can really benefit from playing on Legendary very hard. The reason you benefit from such a high difficulty is, yes, you'll have to deal with powerful foes, Noctilus and Akari, but it also means Tyrion and Alfarian will deal with the minor factions they start at war with much more quickly during their campaigns, which means you can get that Defender of Wolf One effect, or just remove the downside of the inner gates of Wolf One situation. And once you deal with Akari and Noctilus, which you absolutely can, hell, Tyrion probably beats Noctilus on his own. Alfarian might do a pretty good job of standing up to Akari. Once you deal with that situation, it gets a lot better. So, with that in mind, let's talk about what you should do in a campaign as Alarielle. Well, you have an army made up of a Handmaiden, Dryad, Sisters of Avalorn, Archers of Light Armor, and Treekin. You can recruit Treekin and Forest Spirits from the landmark over here that only she has access to if you're playing her campaign. That gives you access to all the Forest Spirit units of the Wood Elves. So the High Elves are already a pretty powerful faction, pretty powerful race, and you add in some of the best units from the Wood Elven roster, yeah, they become pretty damn absurd in their campaigns, in their campaign as Alarielle. Now, you start a war with the Scourge of Cain over here, who controlled most of Avalorn, the Phoenix Gate, and also Nagaryth. And you want to drive them out, but you don't necessarily want to rush them, because taking the Phoenix Gate pretty early on can be a bit of a difficult situation, and you do have other plans that might be better. You do have other opportunities of expansion. So I would obviously take out this army, go take this settlement, and then recruit 2 archers with Alarielle over here, because this settlement has a barracks. So when you take it over, you'll be able to recruit archers with light armor in her army. Do so, recruit 2 of them, and also build up an elven craftsman and the resource building over here, and get the second lord. You can get an archmage that has the ridiculed trait, which I guess I didn't actually have in this case, but the ridiculed trait is the one you're looking for, or you can use the load save character ability. Like, basically start Alfarian's campaign several times until you get the lord choice that you want, like this one. Like, this particular prince is amazing because he got its adept, ammunition, unit experience, really, really damn powerful. Start Alfarian's campaign if you have it. Just start it several times over until you get the choice like this, a really powerful choice. Then just auto-resolve his first battle, get the influence, recruit that prince or archmage that you want, or princess even, and then save that character and you can load it in Alarielle's campaign. It is actually cheaper, funnily enough, to recruit a prince than it is to recruit an archmage. And of course you can get one that doesn't cost influence. The load save character situation certainly makes... certainly gives you a lot of benefits, especially as the High Elves, or it benefits in a lot of campaigns for a lot of races. By the way, take out this army, take the settlement, recruit 2 archers, get these buildings in particular. You could also build the plaza, but it is expensive and you're not necessarily going to have the money on turn 1, because you do want to get another lord over here. And you also want to start globally recruiting with that lord. So you need a bit of money. How do you get that money? Well, you go to Tyrion and you join his war. You get the trade agreement with him and you get a bit of money from that. You could also go with Calidor in that particular situation. Or one of the things you can do is once you take this particular settlement, that's going to give you line of sight over Crix. So what you do...
We fight for the greater good.
Over here, you choose the post-battle option for money. You take the settlement. Obviously, I'm going to lose units here. quite a few units. But that's not important. Obviously, you should fight this battle manually, because you don't have to lose these units. But anyway, you go to this settlement, you go to Crix, and you can get the trade agreement. You will have to pay for it, but the important bit, you can get it, and that gives you vision with Katik. Vision with Katik gives you vision with Alfarian. And getting vision with Alfarian means you can declare war on the Skullcrag, and get a bit more money as well in your campaign from the start. And that should be enough, by the way, to allow you to get 3 archers on your second army here, and of course 2 archers on Alarielle's army without losing units. So what do you do after this particular point? Like, you should be in this kind of situation, you're recruiting 3 units globally in the Gaian Vale with the second army. Alarielle should not have lost any units and taken insignificant casualties. What do? You could go west and take control over this entire province in the Phoenix Gate, but it's actually a much better situation if you go and take Safri. Alarielle has the army with the Treekin, the Dryads, the Archers, of course, assuming you're not losing them by just auto-resolving the highest difficulty in the game, those kind of battles. You should fight those battles manually. You go and take Torfinu. You occupy it, because you loot and occupy it for some extra money. And you do the same with the White Tower of Hoeth and maybe Port Elistor. The reason you want to do that is you actually do want to spark a rebellion, because that's even more money, and the rebellion will help stabilize the situation. You don't want to sack these settlements, especially not the White Tower of Hoeth. You could, if you have enough movement range for it, but you should loot and occupy them. Get a rebellion, spark the White Tower of Hoeth. The way rebellions work, by the way, is it's going to go, the rebellion will always spark on what is your quote-unquote provincial capital in a province. The first settlement you take in a province, if we're just talking about minor settlements, if you're not controlling the provincial capital, then your quote-unquote provincial capital, where the game considers the rebellion to spark, will always be the first settlement that you take. So if you haven't taken the White Tower of Hoeth, the rebellion will spark at Torfinu. But if you have the White Tower of Hoeth, it will always be there. So by the time you take Port Elistor, if you're playing on a high difficulty, Tyrion should have been able to take a bunch of this territory on his own, expand it, maybe even get into a war with Noctilus. You don't want to spark that war with Noctilus, by the way. You could go to Calador to declare that war, but it's not a good idea. An alternative, of course, to all of this would be to go to Illyrian and start a war with Ternok. Or just ignore Illyrian, let Tyrion conquer them, really, because these two factions, you kind of want the minor factions of the High Elves to just be destroyed. However, your goal is also to try and prevent Alfarian and Tyrion from getting too much territory, because if you prevent them from doing so, that limits their campaign. If they're more limited in the number of armies and this troop strength, then it's easier to confederate them. So you don't want Tyrion or Alfarian controlling half of Ulthuan or a quarter of Ulthuan, because that's going to make it harder to confederate them. Just bear that aspect in mind. So take Safri. The reason for a second army over here is because these Scourge of Cain do have 2 armies over here, beyond the one they start with here. So they have 2 additional armies, and what they're going to do is they're going to march one of these armies over here through the Phoenix Gate to try and take this territory back. But if you globally recruit units and then locally recruit units, you should be able to get enough forces over here to defend the settlement. If that's not something you want to do, because obviously it's very expensive and it's an upfront expense, you could let them take the settlement and then just turn around to Alarielle, but it's always a good idea to get a lord here to recruit, even if it's just local recruitment, while Alarielle is conquering Safri. She should get some spearmen, maybe some archers without armor, but the army over here should be recruiting a bunch of archers with light armor as long as you have the barracks over here. Once you get enough money, by the way, go for the plaza. You want to go with the resource building, because that's going to improve your trade potential. By the way, the more factions you trade with, the more vision you get on the campaign map. So you take Safri. Be wary a bit of the Skullcrank, because they might decide to take Port Elistor, though the chances of them marching through Tyrion's territory to attack you when Alfarian is biting at their heels is pretty low, especially on a high difficulty. That's the thing about the high difficulty. It makes the AI in general more aggressive. So Alfarian is going to be significantly more aggressive against the Skullcrank on this difficulty, and so by the time you take over Safri, Alfarian likely has taken some territory for the Skullcrag and put pressure on them. After that situation is resolved, you come over here in Evershale, and then you defeat whatever armies of Dark Elves are here. You should have a full stack under Alarielle. You take the Phoenix Gate. Your second army should be stationed to take the Phoenix Gate. Be aware that Nakari will attack the Phoenix Gate directly if he feels that he can take it. So be aware with your secondary army. The Phoenix Gate is a strong defensive structure, but when its garrison is at low strength and Nakari throws a full stack on it, it can be a problem. Your next goal should be to take Nagaryth over here. Try not necessarily provoking a war with Nakari, at least on turn 1. You should do it later on when Crix is basically in dire straits, or maybe when Katik is in dire straits, because what Nakari is going to do, he's going to take Crix, especially on Legendary Hard, he's going to do this pretty quickly, he's going to be very aggressive, and then he's going to likely end up in a war with Katik. Now, it does take quite a bit of effort for Nakari to take down Katik, but you can either wait until Crix is in dire straits to then go to them and ask them for money to declare war on Nakari, or you can wait until Katik is in dire straits. For my part, I think it's well worth it for Crix to fall and for you to take the territory. So you take Nagaryth, you then declare war on Nakari, you wipe Nakari out, and then you take Crix. You don't want to hold on to Crix. Katik should still be alive, so what you want to do is actually sell Katik to Crix. Now, this is going to make it harder to confederate them, sure, and there is a bit of an internal timer, like when you sell territory to the AI, when you're giving them strength, it's going to be harder to confederate them for a bit. But the reason you want to have one faction here, even if it's a minor faction controlling this territory, you don't want Elfarian, because that's just going to make it much harder to confederate him. But you do want one faction to control this territory, because there's 2 ports here, and you have Be'lakor. So Be'lakor is likely going to declare war on you, but if he has to march an army to take the Shrine of Cain from you, then he doesn't have any port to land here, except, well, toward Dranil, which is pretty far away. So you take down the Scourge of Cain, you take the Shrine of Cain, and then you march on Terranok, take over this territory. Whether or not you want to declare war on Noctilus depends on whether or not he has territory here, but you might even have to send an army to do the Galleon's graveyard to deal with him, because although Tyrion has the ability to do so, he likely won't actually, like, the way Tyrion views things is like the way the AI views things, it's they need vision to be able to make those decisions, and generally most of the time Tyrion won't make that decision until much later on. It's more so because of certain occurrences, like basically until Tyrion sees the Galleon graveyard himself, he won't attack it. The way that happens usually is Noctilus marches an army somewhere around here on the sea, Tyrion moves to intercept, and that's when he gets vision. So don't expect Tyrion to deal with the Galleon graveyard for you. You're likely going to have to do that yourself. You could send a secondary army to do so, like once you've killed Noctilus's main army, because the Galleon graveyard has a pretty pathetic garrison, and it's not really difficult to take. Once you eliminate Noctilus, obviously you're in a much better situation. Once you gotten control over all of Ulthuan, you should be in a much better situation. Be aware of raids of Be'lakor. Be'lakor can be a genuine annoyance when it comes to this, because he will obviously raid your coast. You don't want to control Crix or Katik for the early game until you can station forces there to defend against Be'lakor's raids and obviously prevent them from gaining territory. And Elfarian will handle any East Coast situation. You want the West Coast, you want to go against Morathi, take her province because it's an amazing province, wipe her out, sell this territory, by the way, to Mazdamundi if she has control over the Ashen Coast, which she likely will. I would sell the Ashen Coast to Mazdamundi. Even the Iron Sand Desert to Mazdamundi, get an alliance with him. So get these provinces. The Bleak Coast and the Titan Peaks are 2 of the best provinces in the game. Lots of economic potential there. Move north into the Doomglades. Wipe out the Sisters of Twilight, because they're practically worthless as a military ally. They won't really give you anything. They're not great trading partners. They're not great allies. They won't really help you in combat. So it's much better to wipe them out, sack their precious tree, and take it for yourself, really, because you can settle magical forests as Alarielle. Generally, I would say sell it to Katep, but in this particular campaign, actually holding on to it yourself is a huge benefit. Lots of structures. The High Elves benefit from settlements with lots of building slots, because they can build a lot of structures there. They give them hero capacity, income, various faction benefits. Also, their research requires certain structures that you otherwise wouldn't want to build. So actually these trees are very significant for Alarielle. Then when north, deal with Tarax, get the Obsidian Peaks, great province, really good landmark over here. Start encountering Lee Fanar. most of the time, by the time you get here to Alifanar, he's likely not wiped Sinostra. He can win against Sinostra, but it does take him time, and he's also going to face a lot of pressure in his campaign from the Dark Elves. So if you take the Clawed Coast and sell it to him, that will help your diplomatic relations with him a significant amount in a lot of ways. And then, of course, march north, deal with Malekith, deal with Hellebrand, deal with the situation. The main rivalry you have in this campaign is with Hellebrand, though amusingly enough, you actually don't have a campaign victory condition to actually wipe her out. The thing to know about Hellebrand is when you're playing as Alarielle, she's going to send a blood host towards your territory. So you may have to have some kind of defense force over here to defend Nagaryth from those blood hosts. They combined with Be'lakor can be a genuine annoyance, but that may happen quite frequently. The blood hosts, the raids on Nagaryth, or they may not happen. By the way, take this territory, get control over all of it. If you can have some kind of ally, like maybe Kotep, because he does have a pretty good durability, you can give him the eastern part over here and start giving him the Cast Wasteland, because you don't want to take the Cast Wasteland for yourself. And if you could take territory all the way to here, and then put pressure on Sigvald, that would be great. And you could have an ally that just takes this territory, holds this territory, so you don't have to invest the resources in it. Though Alarielle has plenty of benefits, plenty of faction benefits, that she can actually make this work quite a bit in a lot of ways. Eventually deal with Be'lakor, though invading Albion requires a far more substantial force than you might realize, because the Dark Fortress has a substantial garrison. Be'lakor is likely going to have at least a full stack to defend, and his vassal is also likely going to have a full stack. And while these kind of minor Norscan factions don't necessarily amount to much, when they start getting Marauder champions and berserkers, that is a very, very different situation, and that's something you can expect. In fact, the great irony of Be'lakor is that his vassal, I'm not joking on this, his vassal might actually have a far better army than he does. That's how pathetic Be'lakor is, by the way. But when I was trying to invade the Albion in one campaign, I discovered very quickly just how powerful his vassal can get in the mid-late game. And eventually just, establish a territory of control, and then that's up to you what you want to do after that. Because the rest of the climate in the game is unsuitable, it's either unsuitable or uninhabitable. You could march across Norsca, though that's a very painful and slow affair, but the forces of order should stabilize the situation. If there's any particular downside in High Elven campaigns, is that once you deal with Nagron and all that it implies, you kind of don't have anywhere to go. Though you could decide to just take all of Lorem for yourself as Alarielle, like go over here in Estalia, conquer it. Conquer it, deal with Ikaclaw, take Castle Carcassonne, or just bypass Carcassonne, and then march into Lorem, and deal with them very, very quickly in their own home territory. The only major faction to be worried about, of course, here is Durfu. Anyway, that's all there is. Costine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. For her army, I would not bother with Dryads. Treekin are pretty good though, so you should get them, but bear in mind that they are a bit expensive. Obviously, the Archer Spearman meta does work very, very well for her, and obviously hand maintenance as well.